Hey, this is Russ Anderson. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at some advanced automatic tracking skills leading up to some mesh building and creating a shadow catcher. So we're going to start out by opening up our shot, and it's from Artbeats. So we're just going to open that up. You'll see it's around 1600 full HD frames to start out with. So it's a traveling sort of shot, works its way up to a waterfall. At the end, the camera kind of buries itself in the trees. So we're going to go, and I'm just holding down shift and starting at the end of the shot and working backwards a little bit, looking for the spot that I want to use to be the actual end of this shot. So we'll just stop around there. And see, sometimes it's still working its way through the shot. This is being read by the Windows Media Foundation reader on Windows 7. You see it's reading these files at around 15 frames per second. So it will take a little bit of time to do that. While it's doing that, let's go to the Features panel. And since it's a long traveling shot, we're going to configure the auto tracker a little bit. First thing we're going to do is tell it that we want to have up to 600 trackers, and we want to make sure that they're about 50 frames long at a minimum. There's no point in really having any particularly short trackers on a shot that's this long. So we've got that set up, and now we'll go and start up the auto tracker. And you notice that I'm going to just start up the auto tracker, but not the full solver at this point, because we're going to take a look at the 2D tracks first. So it's making its way through the shot nice and quickly during the part that's already loaded into RAM. Then down at the end it starts taking a little bit longer just for any portion of it that hasn't actually finished loading yet. So now we've got our 2D tracks. And one thing that we'll do here is just look really carefully at this waterfall, just to make sure we don't have any trackers moving up and down that waterfall, because those would not be suitable. That looks okay. Same thing for the other waterfall over there. That's pretty far away. You'll notice there are some trackers that are in the waterfall, but are on spots that are actually stationary, so they're okay. So now we're ready to start up the actual solver. So let that get going. And this is going to take a little bit of time just to work its way through all these frames. So I'm just going to step away for a minute and we'll let this work, and I will get back to you in a little bit. Okay, so I'm back. It took about 1 minute and 40 seconds in total to do the 3D solve on this shot. So time for a very, very quick trip to get some coffee or check your phone. So here's our solve. Looks pretty reasonable. Let's go and do a clean up trackers. And you'll see that there are some trackers that are have higher errors, and one that's still labeled as being fairly short-lived. Before we do the cleanup trackers, we're going to turn off this checkbox that says clear all blips. Now the blips are just the very raw 2D features, and we're going to actually take advantage of them later as we're increasing the number of trackers in some spots. So we want to make sure that we don't clear them all out at this point in time. So we're just going to turn off that checkbox. We can see there are just some points scattered around that are labeled as having somewhat higher errors. So we're just going to go and take those out. And we'll go and refine the solve without them. You'll see the error dropping as we do that. Again, because they're somewhere in the vicinity of 600 trackers, it does take a little bit of time to do this. Again, you see we just go and double check again on that yet further refined path. We'll take those out too. Again, we're continuing to refine the path. Now we should be pretty good. So let's actually go and do something else instead, which is to go and turn on the distortion calculation. The cleanup trackers only make sense as long as you've got trackers that are wrong for a reason. When you do have lens distortion, you can run the risk of taking out trackers that are actually good just due to the distortion, and that's probably what we've done a bit of. But in this case, we've got plenty of trackers to start with. So again, we're just refining the overall solve again, this time allowing for the possibility of the lens distortion. This is running on a early 2009 Mac Pro, I'll point out, running Windows 7. So it's a little bit of something for everybody. And there we go, we've got our solve now. See, we did get a very substantial drop in the error, and now we should really be pretty good. Again, here we have our solve. And let's see, we can go and clean up the trackers. Well, it's still saying we've got some more. We'll take them out. A more sophisticated approach to this might be to go and actually look at these trackers and see what's the matter with them. But I will concede that a lot of people's tendency is to do just what I'm doing, which is hit the button, let the software take a look at it, and you run the risk of taking some things out that maybe should be handled a different way. Maybe there's a portion of the track that's not right, or it's skipped, from one tree to the next, whatever. We're just taking a few things out. Kind of the length of time required to resolve here is reflecting sort of the extent to which those bad trackers were influencing the solve. All right, so we're just going to declare victory at this point on that. And at this point, we can go and consider the coordinate system for this whole thing. Now, there's not any really terrifically good coordinate system choice for this shot. It's just running through the jungle. It's not really clear exactly what the path of the helicopter was. I believe that, in fact, the camera was starting out fairly level, and that our orientation of the solve is actually pretty good to start with. So just as far as the coordinate system, I'm going to take the entire scene and just move it up a little. And I'm going to make some of these trackers that are here at the end of the shot on the waterfall. You can see them over there. I'm going to put them near ground level. That's essentially fairly arbitrary. But once I've done that, I'm going to go back into the scene. And if I go and resolve things again, I want to get a similar sort of solve again. So what I'm going to do is pick out a couple of trackers throughout the scene that are kind of spread out. These are going to be just reference trackers, basically, so that for any further solves, they'll be used to reposition the scene and resize the scene the same way. So I'm going to do a set as seed on these, which is transferring their actual solved coordinates to the lock coordinates. And I don't really need them to be seeds, but I do need them to be lock points, so that in the event of a further solve, those points are going to be moved back to their same location as was before. I'm just going to keep the overall path and the overall set of trackers in pretty much the same space. So now I have what I'm going to call my baseline solve, and we're just going to cut for a second here. This is the end of the first section of this tutorial. Okay, now we're ready to add some more trackers into this scene. So to do that, we're going to go here to the trackers panel, and we're going to just go and lasso a particular area in the view. We're going to add some more trackers in this hillside over here, so we can add some more stuff to that. So now we'll go to the Add Many Trackers panel. When it first opens up, it goes hunting through the scene to figure out what it can do. We're going to turn on this checkbox that says we only want to add trackers within that last lasso area. And we'll just tell it that we want to get around 60 trackers added into there, and maybe again we'll keep them at least 50 frames in length. So now we can just go and add some in, and you see one of the nice features is that it adds them nicely distributed within that lassoed area. So that gives us some more on that hillside there to build up a little density for our later mesh building operations. And similarly, just because it looks like a fun area that you'd want to do something to, let's go and zoom in on these little pools here, and we can do the same thing. We'll add a bunch more trackers in that area. Now, it might be that we want to do something really particular in this area. So we can actually achieve a lot more control over this process from the Features panel that controls the automatic tracker in the first place. So let's go and take a look at that. And here in our area, we've got a control in this Features panel that lets us say how long we want the tracks to be that are displayed. And we're going to be using peel mode that lets us convert the raw tracking data, if you like, into 2D trackers that we can actually use. So just by bumping this up a bit, really we're looking for the best available 2D tracks. So let's just do that, and we're looking only for ones that are not already assigned to anything. So let's just look, and we can maybe take a couple here that are sitting on some of these rocks. So you can see I can build up some more density in this particular area. There's one over here that's on some water. It looks like that's maybe not such a great idea. But anyway, we can go and control that. And I just wanted to show what this panel is used for and how you can use that. Now the trackers that we added with the Add Many Trackers control are created as zero-weighted trackers, which means they're solved basically instantaneously as they're created, and they don't influence the main solve. The ones I just created now are not zero-weighted trackers. I could go and make them zero-weighted trackers, or I can go and just refine this solve again and let it figure out where those guys go. And admittedly, this gives the possibility that may change the rest of the scene a tiny little bit. But again, that's why I set up those bunch of reference trackers to act as locks. So we're going to get pretty much the same solve again anyway for the rest of it. So there we go. So now we have our kind of refined solve here. We've got some more trackers available in areas that are of interest to us. So this is going to be our second checkpoint in this process. Now, if we want to do a big reveal of the things that we've done back by the waterfall, we'd probably like to have a blocking mesh for this mountainside up in the front. So let's see what we can do about that. I'm going to hit the J key to turn off the 2D or 3D tracker points just to clean up the display a little bit. So to add some more trackers along that edge, we'll do another add many trackers. Let's just do a quick little sweep here along that mountainside. Now if you notice when I do that, I actually wind up selecting some stuff that's behind it too. And basically the add many trackers has the same thing because basically it doesn't know anything about the hillside. So when I go and do my add many trackers here, I'm going to tell it that I only want to generate the trackers during about the first section of that track, and I want to make sure that those trackers overlap substantially, have at least 100 frames in common with this beginning section of the shot. So that'll make sure that we get trackers added early in the shot rather than later in the shot back on the rest of the mountainside. So I'll do that now. Now you see we get a bunch of trackers on the mountainside itself there. So at this point we could go and actually the easy thing to do is to go over to the panel there. Okay, this time we already have them created as zero-weighted trackers. I was just going to show the select by type too. Let's do that also. So let's go back to the features panel and let's just go and we'll drop a few more on here this way as well. Let's see, can I get any more? So we'll just peel a couple more things that are right along this edge. So now if I go to the scripts here and I do, it's not going to be visible because it's way down at the bottom. There's select by type. And I'm going to say that I want to select my unsolved trackers. I'm going to want to make them zero-weighted trackers. So now if I turn back on the 3D tracker point display, you'll see that now I do have solved positions for all those trackers that we've just added using the peel process. So I just wanted to show there was a way to avoid that kind of lengthy refine that we did earlier that really wasn't, strictly speaking, necessary because we could just use the zero-weighted trackers instead, as I just did there. And it's really quite easy to set up. So now we've got that, and we're ready to go over to the perspective view. And let's take a look at what we've got. So here's our mountainside. Just move the camera out of the way. I could also use some of the shift and control keys to select these different modes. But this is our mountainside that we want to use as a blocker. You see we have a bunch of trackers earlier on that aren't really what we want to, or we really need to use. So the first thing that we're going to do in this process is we're going to say that we want to convert all of these trackers to a mesh, and basically it created vertices at each of these individual tracker locations. We're only going to use some of them and create geometry on some of them. So the first thing let's do, let's just select a bunch of these, oops, that are along the edge of the mountainside. And actually, let's just look a little bit. I'll point out that the way that triangulation works that we're about to do, it depends on the viewpoint. If I was to do the triangulation from this view, I would get quite a bit of a jumble with very sharp, peaky geometry going back and forth. So I want to actually do this triangulation sort of from the viewpoint where it looks the flattest, if you like. So now I'd go and I'll do the triangulate. That wasn't what I had in mind. I want to go and do, let's unselect all of our trackers, and instead we want to be selecting the vertices. Let's just see. Yeah, we didn't want to get that one. These ones over here, we don't. Those are far away. Okay, so now we've got our vertices selected that we want to triangulate. And we'll do the triangulation on them. This gives us what I had in mind, which is a piece of mountainside. We can lock onto the view here. You'll notice this is kind of a moving shot. We're getting some fairly large tracker marks. So we could play with the world size if we wanted, but let's just show that there's a perspective view settings here that has a lot of different settings. I think people don't usually find this. So we can go and play around with the size of the trackers. Sometimes you also need to adjust the clipping plane as well. And those different distances are all a function of the world size that sits out here on the solver panel. And that number should be set based on the overall size of the scene and the length of the camera path and so on. It's kind of, the world size is basically the diameter of a sphere that contains the entire scene. At any rate, so now we have a mesh that is sitting on this hillside. We could use it just as a blocker. If I want, I'm just going to hit the / key. That toggles on the solidness of the display of the meshes there. So that's something that we could use as a blocker. Let's move along now to our next target area here. Now, my inclination is that this section of the mountain needs some sort of a watchtower. So let's just select one of our trackers here. And I'm going to go to the grid menu and click this one selection to facet, vertices, and trackers. And basically I just flip the ground plane inside the perspective view so that it now has an origin right at that one tracker. But since I only had a single tracker selected, I didn't change the orientation of the scene at all. So now I can go and create a cylinder, and I'm going to need to position this a little better clearly. Let's just get that there on our ground plane. So I've approximately lined that up. You'll notice we're getting a shadow now from the pseudo original ground plane, which the original ground plane in the shot really doesn't mean too much in this particular context since it was set to match up with the waterfall area in the back. But so now we've got our tower. You see our geometry in the front blocks it and kind of pops up behind that. Now, of course, when we've got a tower, we need to get a little shadowing going. So to make that happen, let's again lasso some vertices. I'm just trying to grab some that encompass the area that we might have a shadow. And again, we'll do a triangulate so that we have some actual mesh there connecting all those things together. If I unlock here, move around, you can see what we've got so far. So really what I want to do is we've got the cylinder there. It's set up to cast shadows, but I need to go and take the tracker mesh and set it to catch shadows. And let's just pop over to our perspective view. Here's the shadow that's on the pseudo ground plane there. And when I go and I turn on catch shadows, you notice A, that the shadow appears, but also that the other reference shadow disappears. Once there's something in the scene that's set up to catch shadows, then SynthEyes no longer cast shadows onto the ground plane. And while we're at it here, maybe we'll go and we'll set the main perspective view grid back to the original ground plane back there. So now we have a shadow being cast. Let's go back and look at this from the quad view. We've got a shadow coming forward, which may not be such a bad idea. But in order to have some control over that, we want to go over to the lights panel, tell it that we have a new light. It's a faraway light. It's the sunlight. And now we can move it around. Since it's sitting in the middle of things there, we can either just move it up by the spinners, or we could have used the lock and then moved it around. But once I've got that picked up, now if I move things around, you'll see the shadow being cast in different places. And since this is the faraway light, basically it's the position of the light with respect to the origin that controls where that shadow is going to be cast. So it's, it's probably something vaguely in this general direction. Unfortunately, we don't have any really good reference, I think, to see where it should go. So with that in place, the other part of that is we do want to get our original geometry cast onto this mesh, or the original scene cast onto the mesh as a texture. So we can do that from the texturing view inside of Synthesize. And let's just go with a rolling front projection here. And you see that the display is still a little interesting looking. That's because this thing is still set up as an edit mesh. If I go and set it to be not be the edit mesh, because the mesh that's being edited gets displayed specially. Now you'll see that you just see the texture itself being mapped, the current live image basically for each frame being mapped onto that mesh, and the shadow is getting cast onto that. I can just move that light around. Let's see, if you look carefully, hopefully this doesn't get compressed too much, but you can see the shadow moving around basically on the surface of the hillside using that mesh that we created. And if, probably you might want to go and take this mesh that you've created as the shadow catcher and smooth it out in your animation package, just so that there aren't any sharp sorts of bends in the mesh, just because it's not the world's densest sort of mesh coming out of the software initially. You'll see also there's some artifacts around the edge, because there's around the edges of this down here. That's because there's meshes there, but there's not really any image there at all. So that's our section on what to do with this. Perhaps we could, of course, in reality, we'd create a much more interesting tower. Now let's go take a look at the waterfall area itself, and we'll start creating a little mesh geometry there as well. Before we can do that, we need to go and reselect our tracker mesh and make it the edit mesh again, so that we can get the vertices and be able to select them again. So let's just deselect and unlock from the camera, and now just look at what we got there. You can see the shape of that whole waterfall area there. So let's just grab a bunch of those vertices. And again, we'll do a triangulate to them. And you'll see that the texture is present there for them already as well. So if we go and we lock back, there's some geometry for the hillside. Let's go and unlock again. And just going to start orbiting around a little. Notice there are a couple of trackers that stick out a little bit. So we can take those, like here's one of them here. We're still in lasso vertices mode. So let's do a remove and repair. So that just took that tracker and that vertex out of the mesh and then rebuilt the triangles around the boundary there, so that when you have some tracker that's sticking out, there's another one up here that sticks out a little bit. So we can just go and do the remove and repair on that. You know, it was probably some little branch or something that's sticking out a little bit and got tracked. So, you know, we have those now. This is a relatively smooth background for the waterfall. Now, one of the other things I wanted to show here is kind of our final little area of the shot is just that there's some additional ways to create geometry inside of Synthesize. If you want to be a little more systematic about it and create some particular patch, say I've got one tracker or one vertex selected now. I'm going to go to assemble mesh mode, and now I can just start clicking on different of the vertices, and you'll see that I'm building up my mesh as I do that. So you can get quite a bit of control over exactly what you want as you do that. So I can go and, looking at what I've got there now, I can go and start connecting back to the things that are already created there as well. Now, if I go and decide that I need to start again at some completely different area, I just hold down the control key and select a different vertex. It's a little like, oh, I need to get back to my assemble mesh mode, I think. And now I can resume just clicking on the different vertices to build up my geometry. So you can see you can build things up that way however you like. And now we'll just lock back and let's unselect. So now we've got some actual mesh geometry sitting there. So now, let's say, if I go and move our grid again to the to that particular location, and there's our mountainside. So let's create something else here. Maybe well, that's a little bit large for starters, but create another cone, and I'm just holding control to rotate it. But now you can see we can send things in to the mountainside or whatever as we need to. So we have actual hard geometry there that we can play with and use to do effects. In this case, perhaps maybe we want to have something, emerge from our waterfall. So you can sit and play around with different things that you might want to animate in your 3D package down the road. But the point is, now that you've got this overall scene, you've got a piece of mesh geometry for the front hillside to use as a piece of blocking geometry. Then you've got another section of hillside here with the tower sitting on it and a shadow being cast onto the hillside there. And finally, we've set up a little bit of mesh for the actual waterfall area itself. And we can have different things happen down there as well. So now let's just have a little fun with the shot. I'm going to delete our cone. And let's just lock back up here and look through for something to use as a reference. Well, let's just put our grid back to its initial ground plane. And let's go to our quad view. So now here, looking down from the top, you can see the side of the area around the waterfall. Let's just let's do two things. First, let's create a moving object, and we're going to take that moving object. Let's go back to the beginning of the shot. We're not going to want it going anywhere, so we're going to give it an initial position there. Go back to our end, and now that we've created that shot and we've got it active up here, let's go and create a matrix. So I'm going to sweep out a matrix in this area here. Oops, it's something else altogether there. So let's resize that a little bit. So I've got a little matrix of trackers there, and maybe, let's see, I don't think we need quite that many of them, but we will keep them fairly dense in the vertical direction. Let's go to the preferences here. This is the spot to change the size of the elements of the matrix object. We're not actually going to see that quite yet. We'll just pick a value out. We need to rebuild them. Now you see the effect of that larger size. So what we're looking for are a bunch of things sitting out there. Now that object is actually parented to the moving object that we created. So if we go to the end of the shot here, let's just go to rotate mode. I'm going to take that thing, got our matrix selected, we're going to lock onto it. And we're just going to spin it around a ways. Oops, that isn't actually what we want to do. We don't want to do that. We want an object 01. That's what we want. So if we wanted here, we've got now, you know, a little bit of a shot with some action there. Some little flying vehicles flying around there as we zoom in on them. So, you know, maybe they're the flying Pandoran whatevers, etc. But that was just a really simple example of how you can attach a mesh to a moving object and then animate that moving mesh in order to do a little simulated animation within Synthesize. And, at this point, maybe what you want to do is generate a preview movie. And here you wouldn't show the grid. You just show the basic output of this thing. And you could set up, the file name is already there. So you just need to select the type. So ABI movie sounds good. Some compression settings. Not too many choices in the 64-bit land at this point. And we could set an anti-aliasing setting as well here. And then, off we go, and we can generate a little movie that would incorporate what it is that we've got set up. So this is just a example of what you can do. Here we've done actually a whole bunch of different things as far as the automatic tracking, creating additional trackers, either automatically using the lasso control or using the peel. We created this little mock tower there, and we have it set up to cast a shadow, show the sort of thing that you can do there. And then how you can create additional meshes and assemble additional trackers and vertices into a mesh under a more manual direction as well. So hopefully this has given you, a whole bunch of different ideas as to things that you can do within Synthesize. I know the tutorial has been kind of long and extended, and I appreciate that you've hung in to watch the whole show. So thanks very much for that. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks.